Welcome to the Freedom in 5 Minutes podcast, the podcast where we make 5-minute decisions that can change your business, your relationships, and your life. Hey, this is Dean Soto, founder of ProSulam.com and FreedomIn5Minutes.com, and we're here again for another Freedom in 5 Minutes episode of the podcast. Today's topic is this: slow and steady wins the race. That and more coming up. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Whenever you are listening to this, it is a beautiful Saturday morning. I'm out on my land with my dogs. We checked on the chickens. Chickens are good. All is fantastic, hunky-dory. So the interesting thing happened a couple of days ago. I think it was 2 days ago. And I was looking at my Facebook feed, and and I had a particular post pop up, and it was from a friend of mine. I don't want to give too much detail because it's a little bit of a sensitive subject, but I basically had a friend of mine have a post that came up that said they were going to transition. They're transitioning from one job to another. And then after that, I saw that his wife said that they were actually, another post that his wife said that they were actually laid off unexpectedly at the beginning of the year. Now, keep in mind, his wife is 33 months pregnant. It's their first baby. And I was like, oh, ouch, that sucks. What the heck? Now, this particular person, we had actually worked together in a very close capacity, and we also worked together with another group in a very close capacity as well. And that other group I used to work with regularly. I mean, I used to go pretty much every day and work with this other particular group. And so to see, how do I want to say this? Oh, I want to say it in a very, very generic way, but this particular group that we were working with, essentially we had a pretty big falling out. And part of the reason it was really twofold. One was, I mean, there's always faults on both sides. So I'm not going to say I'm absolutely perfect and it was their fault and blah, 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 blah. There were a number of things that I did or I did not communicate. And there were a number of things that I had expectations for that they did not need or want or anything like that. But we had a particular kind of falling out, which it was cool because it led to a lot of really cool opportunities afterward, but at least at the time it was very painful. And so this person was a part of that same kind of organization, and they stuck with that organization for another, say, 3 years. Okay. The reason why we had the initial fallout was a couple of things. One, I'm a systems guy, right? I love processes, I love systems, I love outsourcing, and I know the power of what can be done if you put a system together and you let it run, right? If you put a system together, you let it run, and you outsource a lot of the system overseas so that you can keep costs low. Well, this particular organization seemed to, at least from what I didn't have access to their inner workings, but they seemed to hire a lot of people for different positions here in the States, and I did not really see how they could do that, how they could particularly do that with how much money they were bringing in. And it was a lot of people. Very impressive, but at the same time, I'm like, how in the heck are you able to keep this going? And there was a number of ways that they were, but eventually it's going to lead to the end of this particular story. So that was one thing with systems. They would have all of these different people, and each one would know their job. But as soon as one left, then boom, like you're back at square one. You have to find somebody else, and you're not going to be able to train them. And then on top of that, you're paying $15, $16, $17, $20 an hour for those people. It becomes very, very tough, right? And it's very expensive on both grounds. Someone leaves, now two people are trying to figure out how that one person did something, right? So that was one. The other thing was this particular organization kept changing things. A new idea would pop up, and it was like, okay, well, let's go after this new idea, and let's go after this, and let's go after that. When it came to marketing information products, it was like, let's do this, and we'll make a good amount of money and see how it goes. But then we'd launch it, and we'd move on to the next thing, and to the next, and to the next, and there was no continuity, there was no consistency, and a lot of the times there was no clarity as well. And it was funny because my wife, bless her heart, she knew way better than I did. My wife kept saying, I don't have a good feeling about this. I do not have a good feeling. I do not have a good feeling. I do not have a good feeling. How are they making money doing this? How are they making money doing that? How are they? At the same time, here I am thinking that I have some kind of ownership in this group, and it turns out I have like no ownership, and I'm actually losing money as I'm working with these folks because it was, I would continually get talked into, hey, well, let's put the money back in the business. Let's do this, and we'll invest it back in the business, or invest it into this thing, or whatever, right? And it sounded great on paper, but it didn't quite work. So the whole story about this, and I know it's kind of all over the place. It's kind of hard to go through and with this story, because I don't want to be extremely specific. I want to be as general as possible, because these are people who I still talk to, and I don't want to ruin anybody's reputation or anything like that. That's not the point of this. This continual pivot and pivot and pivot and pivot and pivot and pivot. Yes, there are pivots, but within a specific concept. Like with my virtual assistant agency, we are systems and process virtual assistants. We will never change that. We will never change that. We might pivot how we find them. We might pivot how we communicate to our value to a potential customer. We might pivot how we onboard a customer, but we're never going to pivot into something that's not a systems and process virtual assistant, right? We're not. It's just not going to happen. Funny dog down there. But it was constant. Hey, let's do this. Let's change this. I have this great idea. Let's move on to this. And I have this great idea. Let's move on to that. Without checking, without planning, without total strategy, and so on and so forth. Well, it eventually seems to have come back to bite them, right? It seems to have come back and bite them, because my friend, literally right after the holiday season, totally unexpected, they had their annual meeting and had to lay off a bunch of people. I can't imagine the pain of having to do that. I can't imagine the pain of having to be the ones on the other side who are getting laid off. That is a lot. That is pretty scary to even think about having to do. And so But the fact of the matter is, because of the constant pivots, even after I left, I stuck with Dream Dropshipping for 2 to 3 years, promoting that and moving forward with that. Whereas they did have one thing that they stuck with, but then it seemed to be still constant. Let's do this. Let's do that. Let's do this. We're going to change this. We're going to do this. And so that constant pivot, wanting that fast money, seems to have caught up to him. And I might be wrong. I mean, this is my perspective. This is why I'm trying to be as general as possible and so on. But slow and steady wins the race. That's why this is so important to understand. Slow and steady wins the race. Are there times to pivot? Absolutely. There are times to change what you're doing, change up, and so on and so forth. A lot of the times it's pivoting how you communicate something, how you change something, how you change your onboarding process, or how you do your videos or things like that. If you're in a market that you're one of the only ones doing it and you already have clients and they love it and so on, you don't want to start changing a whole bunch of things up, because those clients are communicating to other people. They're planning on how they're using your guys for other things as well, right? And the more that you stick with something, the more you're able to bring that message, that value to other people. Now, on the same side, on the same end, is that you're able to predictably forecast where things are going to be. You don't have to take on. This was another thing that they were doing, was they were taking on a lot of investor capital, a lot of investor money, and that in itself, you're basically, as soon as you take on investor money, you're losing independence. You're losing those things. But when you constantly are changing, hey, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to do this, you have to take on that investor money, right? Because you're starting afresh, you're starting anew. You need to hire people. You need to build out new things, right? For the most part. And so the big takeaway is that slow and steady wins the race. Slow and steady wins the race. Okay? If you're good at something, don't compromise it. There's always a blue ocean. I mean, there's hundreds of virtual assistant agencies, if not thousands out there, right? But there's not a single one that is a systems and process virtual assistant agency like mine. And so when I communicate that, it's completely different. There's thousands and thousands and thousands of CPAs out there. But not every one of them is a tax coach or a tax strategist, right? Not everyone is a tax strategist that deals specifically with UFC fighters, right? And so rather than going, I got my CPA license and I have all this competition and I'm not making as much money as I want. You know what? I'm going to go to culinary school. If you loved being a CPA, change what you're doing within that CPA organization, right? I have a friend who's amazing at selling. He taught me how to sell, and he was selling different fast casual restaurant franchises and doing an amazing job at it. Really, really, really good. And he wanted to go out on his own, and rather than changing up and going, I'm going to be a web developer. No, he just said, I'm going to consult for guys different fast casuals that want to start franchising, and I'm going to consult with them. And and he's been able to use that to do a whole bunch of different things. He's able to focus and be able to grow his brand in that, right? So slow and steady wins the race. Oftentimes the fast cash module or I want a fast result on this, or this isn't working, let's shift here. That's not working, let's shift here. Changes. It does not work. You will end up spinning your wheels, and a lot of the times you do that because you're bored or you are impatient. And so what's one thing right now that you're being impatient about, that you're not sticking with it, that you're constantly shifting. Maybe you have an app that you built that a lot of people love, and it's not making as much money as you think it should, and you know it should, and so you're focusing on other things. What about changing how you're monetizing that app, or add new ways of monetization within that app? Maybe there's something else. You're doing consulting, or you're doing sales, or you're doing something like that, and you're tired of the same old thing. What if you switched it up and you added a different type of niche customer to your sales process? Whatever it might be. For me, I stuck with the VA stuff for a while, and part of me was like, oh man, I'm not selling as much as I ought to or want to, and yada yada. And it ended up being where I'm focused more on cold calling and cold emailing rather than referrals, rather than paid advertising, like paid marketing and things like that on Facebook and Google. It seems to do much better. So what's that one thing that, rather than changing the entire thing, you can be slow and steady and just test little changes here and there. All right, this is Dean Soto with freedomin5minutes.com. Go check that out, freedomin5minutes.com. And if you're in the market for a systems and process virtual assistant that can literally duplicate you and duplicate a process that you're currently doing right now in as little as 5 minutes, go to prosulum.com, prosulum.com. All right, I'll catch you later in the next Freedom in 5 Minutes podcast.